I'm Sarah Crompton, and I'm a writer on dance in particular and the arts in general. And I'm really, really pleased to be here today on Zoom talking to Loipa Araújo, Associate Artistic Director at English National Ballet. We're going to talk about her whole career, and it's a career in which she's been the recipient of many, many superlatives. She was known as a dancer as one of the Four Jewels of Cuban ballet. And then when she moved into teaching, she became very quickly known as one of the best dance teachers in the world. And people came from all over the world to study with her and to be coached by her. Now, since 2012, she's with English National Ballet. So they're very lucky to have this jewel amongst them, Loipa. It's so very nice. What drew you to being a dancer in the first place? How did you start out?
Well, I started as an early age, but when you were very little, you just like the movement. You like the tutus, and you like the whole thing of being and telling stories and everything. But I remember when I was around 14, 15 years old, I felt that was something more than just enjoying, because, it's that age when you become a grown up, and then I had to choose between going to parties or doing a performance. I remember once I had a performance of 𝗕𝗓𝗡𝗘𝗗, and in Cuba, we celebrate the 15 years old. And because I was a dancer, I was almost the start of the show, even though I wasn't the one who was going to have 15 years old. And all of a sudden, it was at the same time, and I didn't know what to do. So I went to my teacher, Fernando Alonso, and I said, what do I do? I have this big party, which I'm the star, and I'm dancing the waltz, and then I have the show. And he didn't say anything. He just said, well, if you lose a performance, you don't do a performance because you have a party. You're going to lose many performances in your life, and you will never become a dancer. So that was very clear. I went to my performance. I did my performance, and then I went and dressed up and did the whole thing. I wasn't the star of the show, but then I became a star in my own business, which was ballet.
So that's interesting. So you started out actually at Fernando's school. Is that where you trained?
I started in a private school. It was called 𝗕𝗓𝗡𝗚𝗟𝗡𝗗𝗓 Musical. And it was like a very private. I remember we had to wear black tutus, black leotards, black shoes, and you had to, it was very, very strict, and you had to pay for it. So my parents were doing really a big sacrifice to be able to pay for that school. And I had there, my first teacher was Alicia Alonso's sister, Cuca. And then we had, for a certain time, we had Leon Fokin teaching us. I remember he used to call me Monita. I don't know why, maybe little monkey. And then we had Alberto Alonso for a long time. And then when I realized that was more for, girls just to do exercises and know how to move and everything. And when I realized that I really wanted to dance, to be a dancer, even in that moment in Cuba, being a dancer was not considered very, very right thing to do for girls. I moved to the Fernando and Alicia's School of Ballet. They had opened it in 1952. So I went there 1955. I was 14 years old. And from there on, I kept with them all through the years. My Fernando was the big teacher. And then I had Jose Perez, who also came. And then other teachers when I went abroad, Asaf Meseret, Franchetti in Paris. But he was the one who put my feet on the floor and made me understand what ballet was also. And he gave me, I think he also gave me notions about how to teach. Because I remember when we opened the Cuban Ballet School in 1961, he said, well, you have to teach. I cannot teach everybody. And we said, Fernando, but we barely know how to dance. How are we going to teach? And he said, I am not worried. I've taught you well. I know you would do it. And it was like that. We knew what to do. We knew how to explain. We knew the muscle that was moving for a 𝗕𝗓𝗢𝗓𝗧. And we also had the experience working with him, how to manage people. So that's where my career as a teacher also started. I didn't start as a teacher because I had to stop dancing. I started as a teacher when I was 21 years old, and I loved it. My father was a very nice teacher. My mother also. So I think it also becomes in my heritage.
So, I mean, at that time in Cuba, I mean, the country itself was going through a great deal of change, at which sort of ballet was part of that change, wasn't it?
I got there. I started in 1955 with Fernando and Alicia, and they had the company which was called Alicia Alonso Ballet Company, and it was private. So they had funds and money from the government, not enough, because I remember when we danced a big ballet, we were the young ones, 14, 15 years old, we never got paid, even if it was a professional company. They started giving money from the principals down, and it never arrived to us. And then in 1956, because of a political thing, Alicia decided not to dance anymore in Cuba because they had taken the money away from the company. So everybody had to leave all places just to find jobs. Alicia went to the United States and she would dance there with American Ballet Theater. And then there was a little group of us who stayed with Fernando in Cuba. Right. And just to keep us moving and doing and evolving as dancers, we would do little performances in the same studio, a little bit like we're doing here in production studio. We were doing it in our studio, but then we had to sell the tickets. We had to do some choreography. We had sometimes to sew the costumes. We had to put the lights. So it gave us a real notion of what a ballet performance was. It was not only the dancing, but everything that was around. And that lasted from 1956 to 1959. And then when the revolution came in, the company was given a lot of money. And then we did auditions. People came from many parts of the world. It was called Ballet de Cuba, Ballet Alicia Alonso. And I remember we had Americans, we had from South America. It was a company. And then that was the beginning of what the company is now.
And what was it like then to dance with Alicia? Because I think for most of, my generation of ballet watchers, you think of her as kind of a really important figure, but obviously older and also blind. And so, most of the time that I've been able to watch her, I've never, I've seen her in film where she is beginning to lose her sight. What was it like in those early days with her and with her, was she sort of inspiration to all the...
Well, she was like an example in many ways. It was more than just a relation because we were so young and we spent more time with Fernando and Alicia than with our own parents. So they become like a mother figure and a father figure for us. And I remember if we had to change, we had to paint the studio, we all would go, she would go. But her blindness comes from many, many years. So it was for us like a person who was blind and we could see her dance. So that was just, you can do it. Why we could not say, oh, this is too difficult, I cannot do it. And Fernando was always trying to make us feel like, I remember we used to take some holding the position with our eyes closed for us to feel how Alicia was feeling. Her blindness for us was like something normal and just it's just a thing of don't say you cannot do it, just go ahead and do it. And also for us, it was in that process of learning, it was so easy because we had the teacher who would say, you have to do in this way. And then we would look at her and we saw her doing it the way he was saying. So we had a practical, not only verbal, but also practical thing in the process of learning, which helped us a lot.
And it was a kind of amazing period. You were one of the Four Jewels, but the standards were exceptional. And what did Fernando bring into the teaching at that point to have this company that were kind of really world beating, in a small country? You were up there with Paris Opera Ballet and Russian Ballet and all the rest of it.
I think, first of all, because in Cuba, as I told you before the 59, if you wanted to take ballet classes, you had to pay for them. You had to pay for your shoes. You had to pay for everything. I remember my mother buying me a pair of point shoes and said that has to last for the whole year because they were so expensive. And I remember sewing them, putting paper inside for the shoes to last for the whole year. But from 59 on, we would look talents wherever a talent was, a talent to dance. I remember my first group of pupils were people who had come from anywhere, from Santiago. They were from all the island. And it was interesting to see that talent, because Cuban people, we are so, for us, dancing is in our blood. They say Cubans, little ones, first start to dance before start walking. And it's like that. It's so dancing was something that is very, very near and very inside the Cuban people. And then I think also Fernando's vision, because when they were in the States, Fernando always was watching Alicia, and he saw that even if she had old Russian teachers, from Copenhagen, from Danish teachers, she would do the things in a certain way. So he started thinking, okay, maybe because of the Cuban nature of the climate, because for us, one Grand Plie is enough, the muscles are going to be ready and everything, the line, the stamina, the real connection between men and women, which is so important in the Latin countries. He would start picking from different schools what he would think it was better for us. I remember that we had a lot of English school and everything until they went to Russia in 1957.
Right.
When he came back from Russia, then he understood the importance of the 𝗕𝗓𝗢𝗡 and the importance of the really using the space and the freedom. And then he changed a lot of things. So we kept the neatness and the things of the French school, the Italian school, all Russian school that Fernando had developed on us, plus the new thing of the 𝗕𝗓𝗢𝗡 and the épaulements and everything, plus the Russian technique for men.
So I spent a bit of time yesterday watching you on YouTube and seeing your different performances. What do you think your qualities were as a ballerina? You became a sort of prima ballerina in 65 in your principal. I mean, what did you feel that you had as a dancer?
I think in our time, you had to go through all the process of being a soloist and first soloist and everything, becoming a prima. And I think what made me become a prima ballerina, it was when I went to Varna and I won the gold medal, which was unexpected. It was the first gold medal because they had gone in 64, Josefina and Mirta, but they had won silver and bronze. And then we went, not Mirta, but Aurora, Josefina, and myself, we went in 65, and that's when I won the gold medal. And that's what made me go into the category of lead principal. But I must say that when I got there, I have done all the big ballets. I had gone through all the repertoire. If you ask me, 𝗔𝗕𝗢𝗏, first act, I have done corps de ballet, I have done Bathilde, I have done the mother, and I have done 𝗔𝗕𝗢𝗏. I haven't done the voice part because it wasn't needed. But in Swan Lake, it would be the same first act. So someday I would be doing pas de trois, next day I was doing de Dodil. So that gave us a lot of experience and a lot of work on stage. Right. We were dancing every day.
And you were a wonderful turner. You've got wonderful pirouettes.
Oh yeah, that was, but you remember, that's 1966 or something, like 64 or something like that. In that time, when I did 7 pirouettes, it was like people doing 3 pirouettes was already too much. Now you see girls turning 8, 10 pirouettes on point. So you see how the technique develops. It's just something more and more and more. So it's important that with this ability to do more technical things, we don't lose the artistic part of it.
Right. Right. What were your own favorite ballets to dance? What did you yourself like doing most?
I think for all ballets, you have to know what you're doing. what are you moving in a certain way? What do you want to express? But I loved Swan Lake. For me was the maximum. And then because with Alberto Alonso in that school I told you when I was young, he was the Cuban choreographer who developed more into the contemporary part. And I was always in his ballet. So I developed also a pleasure in dancing contemporary work. I think I was the first ballerina in Cuba who took her shoes off and was dancing barefoot on stage. And so for me, that possibility of doing something very modern today, well, modern for my time, not what you see today, but modern for my time, and next day go into a classical ballet was the maximum you could aspire as an artist, to be able to go into all the different colors the classical ballet has.
Right. And why, so, and that leads quite neatly. So in 73, you leave Cuba and you go to the Ballet de Marseille.
Well, it wasn't like that. I was married.
So how did that happen?
I was married to 𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧, who had been in Cuba for 10 years. So right. His contract finished and we went to Moscow. So I was supposed to carry on my career in Moscow. But right. I arrived in Moscow, it was October, and I spent November, December, January, February, March. And that year was one of the coldest winters in Russia. So I spent 5 months with 25 minus, 30 minus, not seeing the sun. I got depressed. And then I understood what my father, who was a psychiatrist, told me. He said, don't marry him. You're the daughter of the sun, the daughter of you don't like cold weather. You like the hot weather. You like the beach. You like everything. And I understood my father because I told him, no, love can win everything, can overcome everything. And after 5 months, I told 𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧, I cannot live here. And luckily for us, Roland came to the Bolshoi to do a ballet for Maya. It was called the Rose Malade. And he brought Rudy Bryans, he has just opened his company in Marseille in 92 and in 72. And then Rudy had been in Cuba and he had seen me dance. And he told Roland, well, if you want a first dancer, you need a prima ballerina for the company. We don't have any. Why don't you take Loipa? So he came to a class, he saw me and he gave me the contract. So that's why I went to Marseille in 73.
And did you leave did he stay with the Bolshoi or did you?
Well, he let us stay with the Bolshoi, but as he has also developed as a very good teacher, he was also invited by Roland to teach at Marseille. So he came with us at Marseille and we spent 5 years there.
How was it then coming to work with Petit and being in France? And
it was amazing to be working with Roland. It was amazing. And he was such a character, I must say, a man of great culture, a man with such a culture, not only of life and literature, also musical. And for me, it was learning how to tell stories because he was a very good storyteller. And also to be able to find, because usually the ballet he just pick up music. He did 𝗕𝗓𝗓𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧, which is one of his ballet that is done everywhere, and it was done on me. And, to have a choreographer like Petit doing that for you. He also worked on me with his 𝗕𝗡𝗚𝗟𝗧. So, and I danced with Rudy, I danced with Denis, and I was, all of a sudden, sometimes I was just the only prima ballerina. I had to dance every night and in all part because we tour a lot France. So people know me because of that. I did his Carmen. I did the 2 roles in Carmen, the Bandit and Carmen in La Lesienne. Then I did 𝗕𝗡𝗚𝗟𝗧 and did 𝗔𝗕𝗓𝗄 l'Amour. I did also Les Loups, many ballets of his whole repertoire almost I did.
He's slightly gone out of fashion, Petit. I mean, why do you think that is?
I don't know. I couldn't tell. I think Roland's, some of his works are done. I think he was famous. Those works that were done by Nureyev and Berezhnikov, like 𝗔𝗕𝗓𝗄, are still in the repertoire. Carmen, which is a jewel. When you think that he did that ballet in in 1964. So he was so advanced for that. And the opening night was here in London.
So you started teaching when you're 21 and done it while you were in Cuba and enjoyed it. How does the later part of your career and the move into teaching?
First of all, the Cuban company had agreements with Mexico and other parts that we would send teachers in Mexico to teach them, to give them classes and also stage things. And I did a lot of that in Mexico City. But then I was in Havana, I was still dancing. And I remember 𝗕𝗔𝗢𝗡𝗘𝗗𝗚 came to dance in one of our festivals and he saw me teaching, he took my classes. And then when he was named as director of the Arts, Avignon, in the Avignon Theater, he invited me to come and teach and dance. So I went there, taught and danced Sylphide with him. Then being in Avignon, 𝗕𝗓𝗢𝗓 was passing through, and then some of the dancers from 𝗕𝗓𝗢 came to take classes at the Avignon Theater with me. So they talked to 𝗕𝗓𝗢𝗓 about it. So 𝗕𝗓𝗢𝗓 invited me to go with him 3 months. First time I was 3 months. And then he invited me again 6 months. The Italy part in the 90s, that was 89. 90, I was a very good friend with 𝗕𝗓𝗢𝗓𝗘𝗓𝗓 from Marseille. So she was named director of the school in Rome. So invited me to be in Rome with her in the 90s. And then she was the director of the opera ballet in Rome. So I was teaching in Rome. Then being in Rome, Bartoluzzi came and then he saw me my classes. So he invited me to Bordeaux. And it was like a rolling like that. And then with Elisabetta, I taught in Milan, I taught in Firenze. She was director of the company. And I taught in Naples and of course, Rome. Right. And with Maurice, I taught at Brussels in Lausanne 3 times. And I even danced. That was also funny. I was teaching and then all of a sudden he comes and says, oh, I have a ballet and you're the only one who can do it. And I went like, oh, said, I'm doing, it was in French, it's 𝗕𝗔𝗢𝗓𝗡𝗓𝗓𝗡. So it was 1789 and us. It was on the commemoration of the 200th anniversary of the French Revolution. And I was supposed to be the revolutionary. So he said, you're the only one who can do it. So he dressed me up like Che Guevara and then I had to dance. And then at the end, I would take the military outfit and I would be in a red thing. And I was guiding the people from South. He brought a big horse on stage with a cowboy. That was also an experience. 1 hour, 30 minutes, nonstop ballet. Wow. But it was, and we were performing at Grand Palais for 2 weeks every night.
And what was 𝗕𝗓𝗢𝗓𝗓 himself like? Because he's another kind of,
another personality. For me, 𝗕𝗓𝗢𝗓 is a philosopher that expresses himself through dance.
Right.
His philosophy of life and everything, and instead of writing, he just expresses through dance. But he was also, his eyes were incredible because he had this a little bit, devilish eyes, green eyes, very, very intense, very profound. But he was a pleasure to work with. Also full of knowledge, intelligence, culture. Yeah. So for me, those 2 personalities I had in my life gave me a lot, as not only ballet-wise, but as a whole, as a human being.
When you were teaching, what were you teaching? So are you teaching what you have been taught then, or were you beginning to develop your own sort of style of teaching?
I think I developed my own style from everything I've learned, because as I told you, I had Fernando, who is the bass one, the one who just put the bass to grow on. And then I had Jose Perez, who was a Puerto Rican who worked with us a lot. And then my experience working with Franchetti, because when I was in Marseille, when we were not performing, I would go to Paris and take classes in Cité Veron with Franchetti. But there was Nureyev, there was all the Chauviré, all the big dancers were in the studio of Franchetti. And Franchetti gave me a lot of what the French school is. Then I I also, during my years of marriage with Asari, going to Russia every year, I work with Shulamith Meferer, and I work a lot with Asaf. So I think all of that, using my body as the place to try all those things, I developed my own way of teaching. And I think it's working. I think it works because I've seen the results of it. So I see that people, what I'm aiming to work on, I have a result.
When do you make the move to stop dancing and to start teaching full time? And where do you do that? Where
okay, I think, you know, it was, for me, it was very clear. I remember, like, it was already time to, but I didn't know how to do it because I didn't want that big celebration of, okay, I'm retiring and then next 15 days, in a month, I would be dancing again. So I really wanted a retirement that would go very gradually into, and no, people wouldn't notice I wasn't there anymore. So I remember, that's another one of moments in my life which I have so clear. I had to dance Swan Lake. There were supposed to be 2 performances Swan Lake in Cuba. And I remember how hard was it for me to prepare that Swan Lake. Not only because of physically, but also psychologically, just to rehearse, and a ballet that I had done so many times, I couldn't find new things to do. Then when you get that confusion in your head, then technical things stop working. So I had a lot of doubts, but I carry on working, and I did a wonderful performance. I think one of my best. And I said to myself, okay, this is the last one. I want people to remember me for this performance and not because I couldn't do my fouettes.
Right.
And then I decided I would do, because then Alicia tried to convince me to do a second one because the first one was so good, and said, no, that was the last one. And I decided from there on, I wouldn't say I had Giselle performances to do. I wouldn't say which would be the last one. When I danced a good performance, I would say, this is the last one. Right. And I carry on with the big ballets like that. And then I went on into pas de quatre, you know, few little ballets in Antonio Gades' Blood Wedding, in little pas de deux from Roland that I had brought from Marseille, until one day I didn't need to go on stage, because when I saw the people I had worked, I had coached, having beautiful performance, I felt so satisfied and happy. So I didn't need my personal satisfaction. I was filled up with happiness, seeing my people, the people I work with every day, and coach, and gave them all what I can give them of knowledge and experience, would do beautiful performances. And that was such a big reward. I didn't need anything else.
Right. So when was that? When did you stop gradually?
It was around, I had 45, I was 45, 46. I think also because my teaching was fulfilling me. I was teaching almost every day in the company. So I didn't already, that was my day to come and teach and coach. I wouldn't mind spending the whole day there.
What do you like about teaching? What does it give you?
I think it's being a little bit like 𝗕𝗢𝗡𝗧𝗘𝗗. You know, you work on people, you find you have to have the keen eye to find, and it's one of my principles, and I think that's one of the things that my teacher Fernando taught me, is that you can never try to make people dance like you dance, because it's completely, you're 2 different persons, 2 different, even now, different generations. So it's very important for me to try to find what is the best thing for that person I'm working with, in their own nature, in their own way of dancing, in their own way of personality and everything. And when you find that and you see that you just click, oh, it's so nice. And it's so rewarding. It's, you know, and also like Fernando said, you go to a class, and even if you have 20 in the class, everybody should feel that they are the only one you're giving corrections. So that the class is for each one of them. And he also recommended, you first, before teaching, you have to know the people you're teaching. You have to know what are they thinking, who needs a higher voice, who needs a lower voice, who needs a smile, who needs a touch. It's so complicated. Teaching is not about just putting steps together and being in music. Teaching is much more than that.
You become ballet mistress initially at the National Ballet of Cuba. How long do you do that before you come and work in Europe?
I was working in Cuba, and then I would go I was teaching also in Marseille.
Okay, so you're mixing, right.
Yeah, so I was teaching and going. They invited me for 1 month. Then, for instance, when I came here, I remember they invited me. First time I came for 2 weeks, second time I came for a month, and then I came for 3 months, and then once I came over for 6 months. So I started teaching here in London in 2002 with the Royal Ballet, and working with 𝗕𝗓𝗦𝗧 ever since. But I was always going back home and then coming and going, but then really steady living in a place since 2012.
So when you do class each day, do you always do a different class every day?
I try to, because if a dancer knows, if coming to class, if he knows what the teacher is going to teach before even you start, he won't pay attention. It would just be mechanic. And to dance, you need your brain. It's not just moving your muscles. I think you need the brain to know how to move your muscles and to take profit out of what you do. But if you know that my exercises are this, and they, oh no, she's going, closing, sleeping, they could do a bar sleeping because they know what it would be. I don't say that I don't repeat some exercises because I do feel that they are good for them, but I try not to make the same class every day, to put something new, start the class with something different. Starting of the class is important. They come from home, you have to wake them up.
Do you have a plan written down, or do you just go in and sort of do it?
Well, when I start teaching, I must say I wrote my whole class and I did my whole class just to feel what wasn't good, what was too much, what was too little. Now I don't need that. I am able to prepare a class in my head, and I always do it in the evening, because they say the last thing you think about before going to sleep, that's the thing you're going to remember in the morning. So I prepare my class in the evening, and I think, okay, this is my objective. This is what I'm aiming for in class. And then I come and I teach. I don't need to write it down anymore.
And as the associate artistic director, do you get involved in when people bring in new work as well? I mean, do you do specific preparations? For example, if someone like William Forsyth comes in, or Akram comes in, and Akram Khan and comes in and makes a new work for English National Ballet, are you changing what you're doing in response to that?
Well, no, because I think it's the other way around. For instance, before Akram came for 𝗔𝗕𝗢𝗓𝗧, we had a lot of preparation in the sport team to prepare them to that kind of work, which is another type of dancing, more plie, more to the floor. But if you only do that kind of work in the rehearsal and in the studio, they lose a lot. So it's the other way around. If they are really going into a certain choreography, which is so down, and so you have to work in the class the other way around. You have to go more classical and more lines up so they can keep the balance in the body.
And as you say that you work with 𝗕𝗓𝗦𝗧 since you first met her at the Royal Ballet, what do you think is the sort of link, the bond between the two of you that has made it particularly sort of?
Well, I think I've admired 𝗕𝗓𝗦𝗧 as a dancer because of that thing of she in class was never the leading ballerina in the Royal Ballet. She was always a pupil. I've never heard 𝗕𝗓𝗦𝗧 said to me, no, that's not good, or that I don't like that. I won't do that. She was always ready to try whatever I was given, because I am not imposing, I'm just proposing things. And sometimes she liked them, but she would try before I myself realized it wasn't good for her. And then we start talking over there about the companies, how do you direct? She had already dreams, or she was already thinking about to direct the company. And we would talk about it. They say when you have a daughter very late in your life, that's your favorite one. And 𝗕𝗓𝗦𝗧 has come to my life even when we started here. she gave, because I was thinking already, okay, I'm already 70. I should already start thinking of stopping. And so she gave me another, like a second life of this incredible journey we have done. And I have learned to admire her even more as a director, because it's not easy to direct. And I love her as a daughter, and I love her as a director. So I'm the best place in the world. Even my family is in Cuba, but I'm in a very nice place, in a very nice environment. I love where I do. I love the place, and so what can I ask for?
So what do you hope as ballet? You know, your history is so distinguished, and you've touched on so many sort of key points in ballet. What do you hope for ballet going forward, you know, coming out of lockdown, expanding again into the world? What do you hope will?
I hope for storytellers. I think we need good storytellers for ballet. We don't have any more manons and those big ballets where you really tell a story. Tell a story in the normal way, not trying for you to figure it out what you're trying to say, which is more and more complex. And just not to lose the beauty of classical ballet. That choreographers do think that classical ballet can give them still a lot of possibilities to develop and make it in some other ways. So that's my hope, that classical ballet will have still their storytellers and the big ballets. I think Raimonda is going to be a beautiful ballet. Mm-hmm. And I hope more of those type of ballets would come. And also that, that classical ballet will still be in the nourishing part of many other choreographers.
Thank you ever so much talking to me live.
Thank you, Sarah.
So lovely, Loipa, to talk to you. It's really brilliant. Thank you.
Bye-bye.